Oh, here we go. Um, so I am the northern star here on this map up near the Great Lakes in the center of North America, and I'm going to be talking with you today. I'll start the talk about the Yahara River and lakes around Madison, where I live, and then I'll expand the scope to the continent of North America, and then I'll expand the scope to the whole planet and cover the phosphorus cycle of all those places. This is a talk for the SIL meeting, which will be held in Brazil, much farther south later on this year. The Yahara Basin is shown here in the map on the left-hand slide, along with some descriptive information on the right that you can read for yourself. The areas that are yellow and green are mostly agriculture and a little bit of forest. The areas that are pink or red are urban areas, and the city of Madison mostly. And so you can see that the city of Madison surrounds all the lakes, and then the farmland extends north and south. And the intensive agriculture is a major source of nutrients to the lakes. So phosphorus pollution and toxic algae blooms are a big problem. The slide in the lower right shows a satellite image of Lake Mendota with the color enhanced, so you can see the bloom of cyanobacteria throughout the lake. That image was taken on July 8th, 2019. That's a pretty typical scene in summer in our area. But it wasn't always that way. The early settlers and the Native Americans report that the lake was very clear up until the 1870s. So the reports are that there was forest growing down to the edge of the lake. There were white sand beaches all the way around the lake, and the water was clear, very, very deep, far deeper than a person is tall. So a very clear lake. And then in the 1870s, the plow came. The European Americans brought plows from Europe, and plowing the prairie triggered a tremendous amount of erosion. And we know now, by when we core the lake, we find a 75 centimeter deposit of black soil, black prairie soil from the 1870s that was deposited in the lake. Our soils have gypsum in them, wall with the same material that's in wallboard, and gypsum is a sulfate mineral. And so the soils are very high sulfate, and when the high sulfate soil went in to the lake, it tied up the iron. The iron became bound in sulfide, iron sulfide minerals, lost its solubility, and limnologists in the audience know that iron is an important regulator of phosphorus, and the lake lost that capacity to regulate phosphorus by the 1880s. By then, we began to have sewage pollution, high phosphate coming in, blooms, and oxygen was lost from the deep water. And all of these things enabled the phosphorus to cycle much more efficiently in the lake by the 1880s. After World War II, by the 1950s, we had industrial agriculture. Actually, the most of the world, at least the rich world, had industrial agriculture, mineral fertilizers. Our dairies expanded. So with the expansion of dairies, we had manure, and we had truly massive blooms by the 1950s. And now we are getting a wetter climate with more extreme storms. The plot on the graph on the left shows the return time in years between storms of 100 millimeters. And for us, 100 millimeters in a day is a lot of rain. And when records were first kept in the 1930s, the return time, the average gap between storms of 100 millimeters was more than 5 years. And now in the 2020s, the gap between those big storms is about 2 years. So we're getting the big storms much more frequently. Floods, like you see in the photograph in the upper right, are much more common. This is the kind of thing that can ruin your day, right? You were at work, you were thinking, hey, I'm going to go get in the car and go home and see my family, and then it rains, and no, you're not, because your car is underwater. These are a great nuisance, but the big floods also bring a lot of phosphorus into surface water. The lower slide shows a cornfield, a field of maize, that has been completely flooded by a big storm. And the water that is running off into the stream, this is the bank of a stream here, the little bit of grass, and the runoff from the cornfield is bringing a huge amount of mineral soil into that stream, and it'll move from the stream into the lake. So we're also getting big storms in addition to the fertilizers and manure. So we've been through 4 big transitions in this watershed, and I'm sure this has happened in Uruguay and Argentina as well. You must know watersheds that have had similar situations. So we had a lot of erosion of topsoil into the lake, rapid recycling of phosphorus. Then we got industrial agriculture with chemically prepared fertilizers from factories. Then the dairy and meat industries exploded. And now, due to climate change, we're getting more extreme precipitation and much more erosion of the fertilizers and manure. So we're getting more blooms, more toxicity, more cost to clean up water. The photograph shows an algae bloom on the surface of a lake with the motorboat moving through it, and you probably have similar situations in some of your waters. In summertime, Lake Mendota also shows rapid shifts in water quality. So here I've plotted phycocyanin, which is an index of cyanobacteria, blue-green algae, versus a day of 2017. The data are collected by an automated buoy in the center of the lake, and you can see there are these very rapid fluctuations. So there are periods of time when the lake water is relatively clear and people can go to the beach and so on. And then there are other times when it is very murky, very dense with algae, and there is nothing good about those blooms except you can find your duck. If your duck will leave a trail, so if you have a pet duck, you're not going to lose a duck. It's just look for the trail and you can find the duck. But otherwise, people really dislike the algae blooms. Oops, wrong way. In 2010, many colleagues at the university and I started a project on the future of water quality and what could we do about it. So the motivating question was, how could changes in land use, climate, and human demand impact nature and the services nature provides to people for future generations, and what future would we desire? And so this project involved climate scientists, landscape ecologists, aquatic ecologists, and social scientists. And we tried to bring people into the project as much as we could. So the world, of course, is full of lots of perspectives, and our first challenge with the project was to find out what people think. And we tackled that question by asking them. So we had interviews with many people. We had workshops, small workshops, about 20 people at a time. We had a dozen or so of those, and we tried to understand the viewpoints of people toward the lakes and the future. So what did they hope would happen in the future? What did they fear? What do they want to preserve? What do they like about the area that they would like to keep? And what do they dislike? What would they like to change? And what do they think is resilient? So it's going to be hard to change anyway. And what do they think is unstable? It'll probably change no matter what we want. So these were long conversations, very interesting conversations that surfaced a large number of beliefs from the people we talked to, and people are very smart and very articulate about the future. Really interesting conversations. And then the research team sat back and asked, well, what are the clusters of beliefs about how to proceed? Because even though we talked to a few hundred people, there were not really a few hundred different points of view. There's some convergence, and people identified some similar things, and it was possible to cluster them and see lines of fracture among the clusters. And at that point, we we wrote a story about the logical consequences of each cluster of beliefs. And we use stories because everyone can communicate in stories. Not everyone can read a graph or read a table or solve a differential equation, but almost everybody, I think everybody uses stories to teach their children, and they learn from stories, and they talk to their neighbors in stories. So we wrote stories about it, and then we tested the stories on people in the watershed, and and sometimes they said, oh, that's crazy, that's not going to happen, or they said, I don't understand that, or that doesn't make any sense. And then we changed the story. So we kept iterating, getting feedback, getting better stories, better in the sense that people thought they were useful. um, so again, we sampled, we got a lot of perspectives, we clustered the samples, we condensed them to a few stories, and in the end, we had 4 stories. The I have used this approach in many projects now, and I found that you never want to have an odd number of stories, because busy decision makers will pick the one they think is the average. They'll always go to the middle, and they'll ignore the other ones. And the point of the stories is to understand the diversity, the range of things that could happen. So you have to use an even number. So it's very hard for a decision maker to see what the average one is. They have to confront the uncertainty, because confronting the uncertainty is the whole point of the stories. So very briefly, the motivating questions for the stories are listed here. One called abandonment and renewal was followed from the question, what if we simply don't adapt to climate and social pressures on land and water? We just don't do anything, and we let the whole thing fall apart. We played that out. A second one was, what if we increase our investment in education, green technology, better land and water management? Our area already has a lot of high-tech industry that's spun off from the university. What if we use that science, technology, and engineering talent to innovate better, come up with farming methods that conserve the land and water better? The third one, connected communities, was asked, what if there's a generational shift? What if the younger generation actually embraces environmental stewardship more than the older generation? What if we get a that kind of transition? And there's evidence that that's happening. Actually, there are survey studies around the world that show that younger people are more environmentally motivated than their elders. And the final one was a governance-based solution. What if governance treats fresh water as a valued resource? We all, in the United States, we already subsidize farming fairly extensively. There are all sorts of tax breaks to maintain agricultural production. What if we treat clean fresh water as a crop, so that a farmer who has good, clean runoff from his fields is rewarded with lower taxes or more subsidies for agriculture? It's a way uh, uh, of assigning a value to clean water. And then we played out the logical consequences of these four stories. And at that point, we brought in some natural science. We wrote the stories up as stories. We also hired professional writers to write the stories, and a professional artist to illustrate them. And we had a short story contest that was judged by real authors, people who were professional writers. And the winning short stories were read on Wisconsin Public Radio and published in Madison Magazine, which is a widely read magazine in the area. But we also translated the stories into inputs to computer models of land use, land cover, fish and wildlife, water transport and water quality, groundwater quality, and many things that people cared about. I'm not going to talk very much about that technical side of the project, but I've listed here two papers that you could read if you're interested in the technical modeling. And I gave Nestor a reference list for this talk that he can email to everyone. So you can look at the references if you want. If there's a paper that you cannot find, just email me, and I'll be happy to send you a PDF. One of the major results of the modeling is shown here. And we ran the models under a wide range of land use, land management, and climate conditions. The climate conditions were actual climate weather conditions that had happened in the past, so we didn't make anything up. And we then took the data and analyzed the effect of different factors on the direct drainage load of phosphorus to the lakes. The slide shows what I mean by direct drainage load. This is a stream coming into the lake that's draining agriculture, passing through an urban area, passing through homes around the edge of the lake. That brown stuff is agricultural soil that's full of phosphorus that has eroded and gone into the lake. And we wanted to know how these different factors affected the input, the annual flow of that direct drainage of phosphorus into the lake. And there were some surprises here. We found that land use, the amount of land that's used for suburban or urban areas or for agriculture, doesn't matter that much. Land management matters much more. The brown bar, land management that matters the most is the way agriculture is managed. So what are the practices, the tillage practices, the density of cows and pigs and so on? What's really going on the farmland mattered a lot. The climate average does not matter that much. So looking at average annual climate statistics is not very useful. What matters is the extremes. It's the big storms that really matter. And the photograph that I showed you here was taken the day after a big rainstorm. So it's not the average, it's the extremes. Let's see, I think I'm going all right. We because of this project and because of the discussions that have gone on around it, it's now been almost well, this is 14 years since we started the project, and we have seen some progress. The cover of native vegetation has increased in the area. It's not, and it's increased because of the public buying up agricultural land, the county buying up agricultural land and using it for restored wetland, restored prairie, or restored forest. And it hasn't expanded as much as we would like it to expand, but it has expanded, and that has impacts on flood reduction, improvement in water quality, and carbon storage in the soil. The county has invested in manure digesters, which a manure digester is a place where farmers bring their manure instead of spreading it on the land. It is fermented to produce a cake-like substance that's very rich in fertilizer and can be and it's cheap to transport it. You can put it on a truck and cheaply haul it to a place that needs fertilizer. And it also produces methane, which can be used to power vehicles. And it's biogas, right? It's not methane from fossil fuel. It's methane from contemporary plant production. So it doesn't count as a greenhouse problem. There are more winter cover crops, more recycling of phosphorus-rich sediment, and simply just a better public conversation. Nonetheless, the water quality is not good, and we're still working on it. So that's the story of where I live, and now I'm going to up the scale and talk about the entire United States, which is a much larger area, 3.5 million people. And we have a big problem with wasting phosphorus in our region. So in this map, the colors show the amount of phosphorus in surface soil water or in streams draining the land. Most of our streams are outcrops of groundwater, and so the condition of low order streams tells you the condition of the land. The dark green means that more than 50% of the sample sites had more than 100 micrograms per liter of phosphorus. All the limnologists in the audience know that 100 micrograms a liter of 100 micrograms of phosphorus per liter is way too much. Way too much. And all the dark green areas are in that zone. The lighter green means 10 to 50% of the samples were above 100 micrograms per liter. So even that is pretty bad. The blue is okay, water quality, and there's some areas of insufficient data. But this map shows that the United States, which is a large industrial country with a lot of industrial agriculture, has big problems with phosphorus pollution. Um, the This slide elaborates it a little bit. So this is a flow-through diagram. On the left, we see the sources of phosphorus to all of the to the entire United States, and the so we get a little bit from crop and livestock inputs, a little bit from this residual. Actually, what this actually means is they don't know where it came from. It's dust from Mars or something. So there's a little bit of that, and then the other arrows show where it goes. Once the phosphorus is in the United States, where does it go? One interesting thing is that exports exceed imports. So we bring in a relatively small amount of phosphorus in crop and livestock that we import, and we export much more phosphorus to other countries, mostly as meat and animal products. Oops, second important point here is that if the goal of agriculture is to move nutrients into people, doesn't that seem reasonable? The point of agriculture is moving nutrients into people, and people need phosphorus. It's part of our bones. It's part of your nucleic acids. It's part of the energy transmission system of your body. And agriculture does a terrible job of moving phosphorus into people. Only 8% of the total flow ends up in diets of people. More than half of it is added to the environment. So there are processing losses from food preparation, on-farm losses, which is basically erosion, and buildup in soils. And as I showed you earlier, our soils are really, really rich. So phosphorus is a very leaky pipe. We put a huge amount into the system every year. We get a tiny fraction of that out in food for people, and the rest of it goes into soil and water, basically. And as you know, as I've showed you already, if you put it in water, what you end up with is blooms of cyanobacteria. Okay, well, let's look at the planet as a whole. How are we doing overall? I use the United States as an example simply because I have a lot of data from the United States, but there's also a lot of data for the planet. And do we have fertilizer waste everywhere around the planet, polluting all of our fresh water? Um, the this slide gives the big picture in a nice way, I think. So the vertical axis is several different things: cereal yield, arable land, fertilizer, irrigation. And the cereal yield is let's see, you can't see my finger. The cereal, maybe you might be able to see my cursor. The cereal yield is the green dots. So cereal yield has risen linearly with human population through the first 7 billion of us, and continues to rise now. And that's supply and demand, right? You have more people, there's more demand for grain, you're going to grow more grain. So how was that grain grown? It was not grown by converting land to agriculture. The amount of arable land on the planet plateaued about 1960. So since 1960, there has been no net addition of arable land. So we're not doing it by obtaining more land. In fact, there's an American humorist named Mark Twain who said the best investment is go buy land because they aren't making any more of it. And that's right. We're there. It's not more land. It's more irrigation. The blue diamonds show the amount of irrigation, and it's rising pretty much along with cereal yield. And fertilizer is another big driver. This data set is for nitrogen, but the nitrogen phosphorus ratio in fertilizer is roughly constant. So the phosphorus in fertilizer has increased with along with the nitrogen. So the bottom line of this graph is we've had more people, we've grown more food, and grown we have grown more food on the same amount of land globally by irrigating more and by which affects the water cycle, and by adding mineral nutrients to the soil. And you probably know this in your area too. It probably happens in Uruguay and Argentina and Brazil as well. Mining is the major source of phosphorus that's added to the soil. So ancient coral reefs and ancient marine sediments that are now uplifted geologically through the process of building the continents is the main source of phosphorus for soils. This slide shows the human input divided by the natural input of several major chemicals, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur are all essential nutrients for organisms, including us. So those all grow things. Carbon is also a major driving factor in climate change, and that is the element that has the greatest human impact. But phosphorus also has a relatively large human impact, and it is mining of phosphorus for agriculture that has driven that increased flux. And in many regions of the world, phosphorus is over-applied. This graph is from a paper that I'm a co-author of in 2011, and I expect the trends still occur to date. So the bright green is the high-intensity agriculture areas of the region of the world. So you can see the regions in South America. I live in the middle, right in the middle of a major intensive agriculture region in North America. Europe and Turkey have many such areas, and also India and East Asia have such areas. So phosphorus is overused throughout the world because we made it abundant by mining it. And the demand is expected to rise. These graphs were made for the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, and so they're a bit dated, but I think the trends are basically correct. The left-hand graph shows the actual production of mineral phosphorus and where it is used by colored region of the world out to the end of the Millennium Assessment in 2005. And the right-hand graph shows projected demand. And this demand for phosphorus is pretty much entirely food production. There's a little bit of phosphorus used in detergent, a little bit used in toothpaste, a few other products, but it's mostly mineral fertilizer. Phosphorus rock reserves are concentrated in just a few places. There are a number of countries that have modest deposits of phosphorus, but the big one is Morocco and Western Sahara. And due to an accident of geological history, those two countries, Western Sahara in particular, has a huge amount of phosphorus. So the distribution of phosphorus is highly uneven, and most of the world's exports come from Morocco and Western Sahara, although South Africa, the United States, and China also export mineral phosphorus. Because of that narrow, there's almost no diversity of sources, and the supply of phosphorus can fluctuate up and down. And in 2007, there was a political breakdown between Morocco and Western Sahara that came to the brink of warfare, and they shut off the phosphorus supply to the rest of the world. And China, the United States both reacted by closing down their exports because they wanted to make sure China and the US each wanted to make sure that at least internally they had enough phosphorus to grow food for their people. So so we had a situation. So now three major global sources are shut down. Morocco, Western Sahara, which is the big one, and the US and China, which are much smaller, but nonetheless important. And you learned about supply and demand in your economics class. And when the supply was choked off, the cost became enormous. So there was just this enormous rise in cost of phosphorus, and it affected food supplies because poor farmers could not afford to buy it, and the much of the unrest in the Middle East, the political breakdowns in Tunisia and Egypt, for example, about that time, were related to food shortage triggered by lack of phosphorus. So phosphorus is really a major element in the way the planet works. It's essential for food production. It's a serious water pollutant that harms human health and harms the biodiversity of fresh water. And it's a cause of global food shocks and instability. So it's worthwhile for us to pay close attention to phosphorus. Elena Bennett at McGill University and I in 2011 asked the question, how much phosphorus can be added to the biosphere and still have healthy water? And this was prompted by the planetary boundary idea that was originated by Will Steffen and others. And Elena and I tackled the problem the way ecosystem scientists tackle every problem. We drew boxes and arrows and figured out the pools and flows, and then we got estimates of the pool sizes and the flows, and then we solved the model. And in particular, we wanted to know how much phosphorus can be added to rivers and lakes before we exceed limits for human use. And we got those limits from World Health Organization data. The World Health Organization has guidelines for cyanobacteria, and we have regression models that connect phosphorus load to cyanobacteria, and so that gave us a target. I'm not going to go through the math and the details today, but I have provided you with a reference in the list, and you can read the paper if you would like to. So the bottom line is that we came up with a range of estimates for the planetary boundary, for the limit. So and we did an uncertainty analysis. So the lowest possible estimate is green. We think that the planetary boundary is no lower than the green number, and we think the planetary boundary, the upper limit, is no higher than the yellow number, and where we actually are is the red number. So we are way past the planetary boundary. We're using far more phosphorus than we should if we want to have drinkable, swimmable, fishable water on the planet. We're essentially running out of potable water on the planet because of the amount of phosphorus that we're dumping on the planet's soils. So what do we do about it? How could we change that situation? Well, a good way to tackle that question is go back to the box and arrow diagram that we used in our, that Elena and I used in our 2011 paper, and ask, where are the leverage points? Where can you change things? And it's pretty simple, really. We need to have less mining. Simply bring less phosphorus into the system. Stop bringing phosphorus into the system. Should cycle phosphorus in a very tight way, very efficient way between crops and soils. Just have enough in the soil to grow the crop, and then use the crop waste uh, to plow it back into the soil and keep the phosphorus cycling in the soil. And that way there'll be less flow to rivers and lakes. So we really need to tighten up the cycle in agriculture, in the crop soil system. Does that make sense? Okay, good. So let me try to summarize. Phosphorus is a rare element on Earth that is essential for life. We've extracted phosphorus at 14 times the natural rate on average, and intensified storms that cause erosion to surface waters. So those are, if you wanted to make phosphorus cycle worse, those are probably the two worst things you could do for your planet. The excess phosphorus causes toxic blooms that impair human health. We can meet our needs by recycling waste to soil, crop waste to soil, at a supply rate that meets demand for plant growth. We've got plenty of phosphorus in agriculture, and what we need to do is use it more efficiently in a tighter cycle. Recycling phosphorus will improve water quality and human health and stabilize the food supply, because if we're running agriculture off recycled phosphorus, we are buffered. We are not affected so much by price fluctuations due to political instabilities in Morocco or wherever else. So recycling stabilizes things as well. Before we start, okay, good.